I have confirmation now that the meeting is recording, so with your permission, Chair, I'll now take the adherent for the meeting of the Executive Committee of the 25th of August 2021.
Thanks, Pauline.
Councillor Allison, I'm aware that you're here. Also, Councillor Anderson. I have apologies from Councillor Bradley. Councillor Brown.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Chalmers is here. I have apologies from Councillor Convery. Councillor McClymont, can you confirm that you're at the meeting and substituting for Councillor Convery?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Corbett. Okay, nothing from Councillor Corbett. Councillor Craig, I see that you're here. Also Councillor Devlin, Councillor Dorman, Councillor Fagan. Councillor Faulkner, are you here at the meeting?
I'm here, Pauline.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton, you're here. Also Councillor Horsham, Councillor Logan. Councillor Loudon is here. Councillor Lowe, can I just check that you're at the meeting, please? Councillor Lowe. Okay, nothing from Councillor Lowe at the moment. Councillor McAdams.
I'm here, Pauline.
Thank you very much. Councillor McCreary is here. I have apologies from Councillor McGuigan. Councillor Miller.
I'm here, Pauline.
Thank you. Councillor Nayland is here. I have apologies from Councillor Nelson. Councillor LeBlond, can you confirm that you're at the meeting and substituting for Councillor Nelson? I'll come back to Councillor LeBlond in a minute.
I'm here, sorry.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much.
I'm here for Councillor Nelson, but I've missed the last 2 minutes, so I don't know what's been going on.
That's okay. We haven't started any business of the meeting. Thank you. So, Councillor Ross, you're here. Councillor Shearer.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wardhaw, I'm aware that you're at the meeting, and also Councillor Wilson. And just to confirm that there are a number of officers present at the meeting, is there anyone who's attending the meeting or substituting whose name I haven't called? Okay, thank you. With that, Chair, I'll pass back to you for the business of today's meeting.
Thanks, Pauline. We'll start right away with any declarations of interest. I don't see any hands up, so I'll move on to item 2, which is minutes of previous meeting held on 23rd of June. Does any colleague have any questions on previous minutes? No, I can't see any hands up. I'll move the correct record of the minutes.
A second, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the monitoring items, which are items 3, 4 and 5. The first of those being item 3, which is the revenue budget monitoring for period 4. That's on pages 17 to 28, and I would ask Paul to give us a report on this, please.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everybody. This is a paper that takes us to the position in the middle of July. Right, so it's pretty much the first quarter's figures for the new year. And what the paper does, in the same way that we did last year, there's an emphasis, as you would expect, on the position in relation to the pandemic and expenditure in relation to the pandemic. And that begins at section 4. And we really look at two things in section 4. We look at the funding that we've received for these pandemic costs, and then we look at the costs themselves. So starting off with funding, if you go to the second page of the report, you can see the table, which is entitled Funding Summary at the top of that page. And what that shows are the amounts that we carried forward from last year in terms of grant that we've been given by the government towards the costs of the pandemic. And that comes to nearly £31.5 million. And then added to that, we've got the funding that we've received in the new year, right? And that comes to £25.5 million. So what that table shows is that in the current year, we've got just over £57 million worth of funding, which can go towards pandemic costs. And what the paper starts to do after that is to break that down. So the first thing that I would point to is, or the first element is, so of that 57 million, 25.186, right, is in that column down there that's entitled specific. And that's covered at 4.3. And the point that is being made there is that that's funding that we've been given for specific purposes. So 4.3 talks about those in terms of things like recovery teachers, logistics, digital inclusion, business support grants. That's within that. I fully expect that to spend this year. So the other part of that is this non-specific funding. And 4.4 picks up the fact that we've got £31.889 million to meet the potential costs of the pandemic once those specific things are being dealt with. Now, there's a point made at the end of paragraph 4, and that is it's highly likely that recurring costs are going to be faced in 2022-23, but it's highly unlikely that we will get additional COVID-related funding to anything like that scale. So we need to bear that in mind moving forward. So what the paper starts to do after that is to say, OK, we've got that funding, but what are the costs that are likely to come in against that? So the table that you can see midway down that second page gives an estimate, as best we can do it at this point, of what we're likely to spend this financial year on COVID costs. And at the moment, we're coming to £18.199 million. So that's estimated only. There are likely to be further costs arise, and I'll update the committee as and when we come across those. But I'd go back to that point. Beyond this year, we are still likely to have costs. But at the moment, I don't know that we're going to get any further funding towards that COVID expenditure. So at the foot of that page at 4.7, it starts to pick up the position in terms of where we are at mid-July, how much money in terms of that spent is going through the books at that point. If I take you onto the third page of the report, which is on page 19, it picks up social care costs. And there's a point made at paragraph 9. And that's really making the point that in that estimate of those COVID costs, I'm not factoring in social care costs. What's happening at present is that through NHS Lanarkshire, there is what's called a mobilisation plan, right, that's been put together jointly by NHS and our Health and Social Care Partnership, which goes to the Scottish Government. This is the same thing that happened last year, and it's through that route that we get reimbursed for those costs. So those things are over and above what we spoke about before. Now, the rest of section 4 talks about the strains that are there in terms of social care costs at the moment. So there are items covered in paragraphs 4.10 through to 4.12, a higher requirement in terms of packages of care at home and discharge. We also talk about additional care home placements and the relationship in terms of care at home packages and delays within hospitals. So all of these things are adding to pressure in terms of social care costs. Now, 4.12, again, this is the point to remember on this. These are being charged to that mobilisation plan for 2021-22. And through the Health and Social Care Partnership, that dialogue's happening with the government about the reimbursement of those costs. So that's still an active stream of discussion, and we need to see how that pans out. But again, the points being made as we move into year 22-23, it may well be the case that there are no further mobilisation funds available and that stream of funding stops, but the costs may well continue, particularly when you consider the things that we're talking about in the report. There's also at the end of the report a reference to pressures within children and family services. And again, part of that we're attributing to the impact of the pandemic. And again, we'll need to see how that plays out across the course of the year, because that may in turn add to that list of pandemic costs that we've got. So in terms of the recommendations in the paper, it's looking for noting of those positions in terms of funding and estimates of expenditure on the COVID estimates that we've got this year. It also just looks for noting of our position in terms of the costs that are there against budget, and also of the housing revenue account, which is included in the paper as well. So having said that, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul, for the report. Does any colleague have questions? I see there are some hands up. Robert, would you like to come in first?
Thanks very much, Chair. Could I ask about 411 and ask for a bit of clarification on the care at home thing? We've obviously had issues with care at home over the period with the adverse care reports and the work done to sort of turn that around. Can I just be clear here? What are we talking about? Are we having to put in extra staffing beyond the normal complement to deal with this? Is there greater demand for it? Is that going to steady out? What's the kind of flavour of all of that in terms of where we're going on it?
Right, so at present, we've authorised additional recruitment, right, to try and get to a point where we've got a degree of certainty around the sufficiency of the staffing level that we've got in order to deal with an increase in workload. Right, so there are steps being taken to do that. On the other part of your question, in terms of how that plays out, we'll need to see. Right, so we'll try and start from a position that's as solid as possible in terms of the level of workforce that we've got. But this is a fluid position. It may start to abate as the year goes on and we go into next year. Right, but we may find ourselves having to deal with what's a new baseline level of care to be provided. So it's very much an issue that's live and that's active at the moment.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. David Shearer. David.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the same topic, Paul, social care. During COVID, we obviously tried to provide as much care to our clients as we possibly could, given the restrictions. Now, some of those care packages, people were asked to pay a contribution depending on their circumstances. Now, we weren't always able to provide the full care package. What I was wanting to know was, were we still charging people? And if we were charging them for services they did not receive, are we going to refund that money back to people who didn't receive those services? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor, I would need to pick that up with Social Work Resources, right, and I'm happy to pick it up with yourself offline, right, in terms of the extent or even individual cases around that is an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Alan Faulkner.
Thanks, Chair. It's following on David's point on social care. I had 2 or 3 instances where service users who attend daycare, the carers came and said to me they're still getting charged for the service, though the service has been provided in their house. So having a meet me and BT Heady service, I did say to him, by the way, what about the £160 a week you're saving? And he asked, what, 160? You'll know in the report in daycare that they reckon that each service user who goes to daycare, it costs £8,000 a year to transport them. Since the actual service has been provided in the house, that £8,000 hasn't been used. When I asked Ian this, he come back with the thing, oh, these buses, they're leased or they're contracted to us. So if we're getting recovery money from the government, will that come into the transport costs that we're not using, having buses sitting between Hillhouse and Blantyre in the garage? And if so, will that be a surplus to social work? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Alan. Paul?
Okay, right, so in terms of the answer that you've been given, it's absolutely right and valid, right, that there will be costs there that exist regardless of whether a bus is turning a wheel or not. What we need to look at is, in terms of how those costs exist within the mobilisation plan, because it may or may not be the case that they're recoverable, right, through that route. There are a whole range of costs, you'll understand, that have gone through that mobilisation plan over the period of the pandemic. So I need to look at the specifics of that and how that played into charges in terms of the answer that you've been given, Councillor Faulkner, and I'm happy to do that.
Thanks, Paul.
Paul, could you make that available so that we can all get an idea of where we stand on that? Okay. Have you any follow-up question, Alan? Are you quite happy with that? I see your
I'm quite
hands
happy,
up.
Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Monique McAdams, I see your hands up.
Hi, Chair. Thanks. It was Paul. It was just to say, in regards to David's point, can you please make that available to all of us?
Through the chair, right, I'd be happy to come back with a general response.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I don't see any other hands up at this present time. Monique, you still got your hand up? Thanks. Okay. I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to item 4, which is the capital programme monitoring for period 4. This is on pages 29 to 36. And again, I would invite Paul to give us a report.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Again, so this is the capital monitoring for the same period as we discussed in the revenue paper a second ago. So what the paper starts off by talking about are a number of additions to the programme, and we can see these on page 32. So that's Appendix 1. There are amounts added in respect of a number of projects there: the Hamilton Mausoleum, Tom Craig Centre Hall in Law, and a number of projects under the heading of the Central Energy Efficiency Fund, which we do every year. So those get added in. That means a total increase of £349,000 into that capital programme. So that takes the value up. The top of the second page, it covers off our spend to date. And what you can see there is we're spending slightly ahead of what we would expect, right, at a level of just over £10.5 million at that point. So that's a positive thing in terms of progress. The housing programme, which is actually bigger than the general fund programme this year, is covered in section 5, and that's just under £94.5 million. And again, you can see good progress there in terms of the housing programme. And there's a reference in there in terms of timescales for the new build housing programme. There's an unusual part to this paper in comparison to what I would normally bring you, right? But there's a reason for doing it, and that's section 6, and it's to pick up a bit of information around contract prices. And yeah, the gist of this is that the construction materials supply chain appears to be subject to unprecedented disruption at present as we come through and come out of this pandemic period. And as it goes on to say in the remainder of section 6, engagement with our suppliers confirms that materials shortages, longer lead times and steep price increases are going to impact on their supply chain. And that has a knock-on impact, particularly in what we're doing in the capital programme. Now, that could cause project delays due to requirements for redesign or potentially cost increases and the consideration of those. So just to make the committee aware of that at this point. Our recent experience is that tenders have been submitted significantly above our expectations, and that comes back to my point on price. And there is work going on within Housing and Technical Resources to review the pluses and minuses, I suppose, in terms of continuing to do the work in the short term, knowing that we are likely to be faced with inflated prices and materials that are difficult to source over this period of time. The point's also picked up at 6.4 that this extends to road services. So many tenders that are coming back through work that would normally be pretty routine in terms of roads are being returned higher than contracted rates. So what I'm committing to doing at the end of that section is to come back to you with further updates on this as the year progresses. But it's to make the committee aware that this may well be a reason that we come back across the course of this year in terms of things potentially being delayed or potential cost increases in relation to them. So in terms of the recommendations, Chair, just at 2.1, we're looking for noting of the position of the programmes, approval of those changes to the programme that are covered in Appendix 1, and it notes as well that this is going to be monitored through the Financial Resources Scrutiny Forum. So thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Paul. I see we already have some hands up. Eileen Logan, Councillor Logan, can you come in?
Thank you very much, Chair. Paul explained very explicitly what is happening out in the world of construction right at the minute. And we've all heard of people, maybe building a fence, and then all of a sudden it was, a double in price, and that's just, for local people. So it's 10 times probably worse when it's big construction and things that the council wants to do. So I think he's actually sort of answered that he's going to keep us updated, and he'll be putting it always to, the appropriate committee. But also, if it starts to impact seriously, because I don't know that it's going to go away anytime soon, according just to the local construction people I speak to, are we going to put this, say, on a risk register as a potential risk to the council, either that we cannot complete? Just as an aside, I know that there was 3 houses getting built in the town, and they lay for months and months and months. And when you were walking by, basically what the man said was that it's just because he couldn't get, materials, etc. So if that was in small scale, maybe bigger scale, it could be worse. But will we be putting that, or potentially would we put it on a risk register? Because down the line for road construction or schools or getting, repairs or housing or whatever it happens to be, getting built or repaired, it might have a big impact. But Paul, thanks very much. You did give a very good explanation. Thank you.
Paul, you want to come back in that?
Listen, I think it's an excellent point from Councillor Logan. Is to give reassurance. See, in terms of the project management arrangements, down to individual projects, or for example, schemes of work that housing and technical resources or roads will do, they'll have project management arrangements, right? And for each of those, they'll have things like risks and issues logs, right? And this is on these, right? So you are absolutely right, that features. As we go through the year and we do things like revise the council's risk register, which we do periodically across the year, this will have to figure. So that's absolutely in our sights.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Devlin, morning.
Thanks, Chair. Again, and Paul, thanks for the report. I just want to ask a question. It's in regard to the nurseries. Now, the Scottish Government, and again it's because of the issues we've had in Bothwell, now they put a ceiling that we're only allowed to spend 3 million on it. Now the cost of that hasn't started. You and I both know now it's going to increase considerably. Can we go back to the Scottish Government and get the difference of what we're paying and what the actual initial cost of it all is going to be and what they're contributing to it? Thanks.
Paul?
To be honest with you, Councillor Devlin, right, I don't think it's as straight a relationship as we might have hoped in that respect, right? There will be a cost. If I'm being honest with you, I don't know where we are around the contract for building that particular building, right? The message that I'm giving here is, I think it's fair to say that most things build across the period of this year are going to be more expensive or have the potential to be more expensive than we originally thought, right? So around that relationship and being able to go back and request other money, that I couldn't confirm at this point.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Chair.
David Shearer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to see the additional £52,000 for the Tom Craig Centre to deal with additional problems that were discovered when we started to do the maintenance work there. £52,000 out of an £85 million budget would not appear to be a great deal of money, but that money will make a big difference to the community of Law to get their hall back into operation and able to use it fully again for the first time in many, many years. So I've got to say thank you to the officers for that one. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, David. I can't see any other hands up. I'm going to move the recommendations now.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, colleagues. We'll move on to item 5, which is additional funding from the Scottish Government and other external sources, pages 37 to 40. And again, Paul, to give a report on this, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So all of these are revenue items, right? And they're all in the year that we're now in, and it comes to £27.5 million. You can see them laid out in that appendix. They all got referred to at the end of that previous revenue report, so they're all things that were contained within that, and you can see the full range that are there. In terms of the ones that don't impact on the council's budget, they are the business grant items that you can see. So, for example, of that 27.5 million, 14.5 relates to Scottish Business Restart Grant, right? So that doesn't increase the council's net budget position. That's passed to us, and in turn we pass that out to the recipients of those grants. But again, any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Lindsay?
Thanks, Chair. Paul, just wondering what the a few of us was wondering what the Pupil Equity Fund premium is. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hamilton. Right, again, the Pupil Equity Fund premium, right, I believe is a supplementary amount which is coming in addition to the Pupil Equity Fund as part of that support structure for schools, but I'm happy to get further information out on exactly what that is, the basis of allocation across members. Thanks, Chair.
That'd be useful. Thank you.
Robert?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I just want to make the point I made at the leadership meeting about the sheer amount of discretionary funding that comes from the government. We have had some talk before about more flexibility and all that, and I just wanted to urge the representatives on COSLA to make sure that at any appropriate opportunity, the whole issue of mainstreaming some of this stuff comes through. I do appreciate COVID is different, but even allowing for COVID, you've still got quite a significant amount of money coming through each month on these kind of additional things. And if the council had control over it, rather than having it, this little bit for this and this little bit for that, then to be quite frank, it makes a considerable difference to our ability to, to target our priorities and make sure we can deliver what we seek to deliver corporately with the government. So I think it's an issue to be kept at. I just want to make the point, if I may, as I did at the leadership meeting. Thanks, Chair.
Point taken, Robert. Thanks very much. David Shearer.
Thanks, Chair. It's just to follow on from Robert's point. I mean, 27 million from the Scottish Government is absolutely brilliant to spend, but it's all allocated. And I think we have to get the message across, because it's too easy for people to see headlines. Scottish Government gives 27 million to South Lanarkshire Council. It's all spent. It's no free cash. Paul doesn't get handed a great big lottery win and go, there you go, spend on anything you like. It's not for us just to go, oh, great, we can fix all the things we want to fix. It's all allocated. And I do worry sometimes that the public doesn't see the fact that we're just handling the cash from one to the other. It's not our cash. We don't have control over it. And that is, I think, obviously a worry for us, and we have to get the message across. We're not just being handed big wads of cash to spend any way we like. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, David. I see no more hands raised on this matter, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, colleagues. We'll move on to items for decision now. The first of those is item 6, land and property transfers, pages 41 to 46. And can I have Danny Lowe to make this report, please?
Thanks, Chair. Morning, everyone. This report proposes that internal transfer of a plot of land at Clyde Terrace in Bothwell for the construction of the nursery, and we're looking to transfer that between the housing revenue account and the education account. And the report also proposes that the 8 plots of land that are listed in Appendix B, which is on page 44 of your papers this morning, are declared surplus to allow negotiations with the adjacent owners to conclude. So just in summary, the committee has been asked this morning just to approve the recommendations which are set out in section 2 of your report, which is that the land in Appendix A, which is the Clyde Terrace plot, is transferred between resources, and also that the land listed in Appendix B be declared surplus to council requirements. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Danny. Does any colleague have any questions on this? I see no hands raised, so I'm going to move the recommendation.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we'll now move on to item 7, which is the Local Child Poverty Action Report 21, on pages 47 to 120. And can I ask Rhonda to give us this report, please? Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to present you with the draft Local Child Poverty Action Report for this year for approval. You'll see a bit of the background to the report in section 3. So there's a legislative requirement for local authorities and for the NHS to produce these reports every year. And the purpose of them really is to look at the work that's happening in each area, to make use of all the information that we have around child poverty within the area. And that includes the data in terms of statistics, the lived experience information that we have from families who we're working with and who are experiencing poverty at the moment, and also across our partnership, the staff and the skills and experience that they have, and to bring them together to look at creating change and to reduce levels of poverty. You'll see the national indicators in section 3.3, which the report works towards producing, and very, very much a focus on change and where activities continuing, understanding why we're keeping doing these things and what makes it effective as well. Section 3.5 there, you'll notice we've had extremely good feedback on our previous reports from both the Poverty and Inequality Commission and from the Improvement Service. And they've indicated to us that actually they point other councils towards the work that we've produced if they're looking for some support and examples of good practice there. The approach that we take locally is very much a partnership one. So we produce one report with ourselves and the NHS, but also the much wider partners who are involved in community planning, and in particular the type of work that supports producing a move out of poverty for these families. So there's a working group which has now been meeting for about 3 years, and they produce the plans, review the plans, and make sure that it's current and focused on what we should be doing. In section 4, you'll see the scope of the plan. So there's 3 main drivers which all the actions are organised around, and that's the cost of living, income from benefits, and income from employment. And we're very focused in South Lanarkshire on income from employment as being the main driver to really lift families out of poverty. The other 2 certainly can help with their current living situation, ease in life for them, but in terms of long-term impact, that is the one where we want to have the focus for the long-term sustainability of that lift. We've identified one of the areas of improvement in working with those with lived experience and making sure we're keeping that voice very strong. We've used it very effectively in the plan that we have at the moment, but we think we can do better with it too. And the sort of approach that we take to that, rather than running a range of consultations, we have many partners out there who are working directly with families and who already have strong relationships with them. So we're trying to support a more natural way of engagement, that the conversations that they're having with them are then informing and feeding into our planning process. Section 5 takes you through briefly the impact of COVID. There has been some delays in where we would have wanted to publish the plan around the end of June for the last 2 years. This still meets our legislative requirements, so we haven't missed anything there, but we're now moving back towards next year being on target for that end of June publication date that we're looking towards. Another important thing from COVID is obviously still the bit of unknown around the negative economic impact that we're expecting and seeing in some cases, and continuing to understand what that means locally and what challenges we have and how we can react to those. So one of the actions from the working group was to bring together a small research subgroup, and their task is to continue horizon scanning and all of the information that we have through studies and reports from elsewhere, and making sure we're looking at other good practice and identifying what else we could do locally. The plan is presented for you there as Appendix 1. There's some key areas for improvement we're working on this year and some new activities across all of the chapters. And as I've said, we're very much continuing to monitor the situation, to look at the impact that the actions are having, and to look at where we need to improve, change, develop any of these in partnership with our families. For that improvement work, you'll see in section 6.4 and 6.5, we're getting some support from the Improvement Service to identify how we can move this forward, and working with senior managers across the partnership as well to help us in this. So what we're asking today is that you note the progress of the working group and the approach that we're taking locally to producing these reports, and also that we're presenting the report to you, hopefully for your approval for publication. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that report, Rhonda. I'll open up to all these questions. I see Councillor Chalmers. Maureen.
Thanks, Chair. This is a really excellent report that's been produced collaboratively by a range of partners. And I suppose when you just see names on the document, you might underestimate the amount of work that all those partners put in on the ground. Not just putting things onto paper, but actually listening, having conversations and contributing to the discussions that take place to inform this plan. It's also that mix of research, as Rhonda said, and data at a national level. But I think increasingly we've used very much local data, local intelligence, the voices of local people. And I think in the last year, one of the steps in the right direction, as Rhonda said, it's still got scope for improvement, but the voices, the lived experience of our local residents. And that's been very powerful. And the Community Planning Partnership have heard many of those voices direct at board meetings, and have indicated I wish to continue doing that, because I think it places everything in context by doing that. So thanks very much. I mean, I think the people who are contributing to this plan are also the people who are on the front line, be it through our council services, health services, third sector, organisations like Skills Development Scotland to contribute to this work too. So thank you to everyone, and look forward to kind of the improved work that we'll do in the coming year. Thanks, Rhonda.
Thanks very much. Katie, I see your hands up.
Thanks very much, Chair. And there's a couple of points which I found very interesting in this. Thanks, Rhonda, for your presentation, particularly around data and maximising income. I completely agree with Maureen's points there about lived experience. I thought there were some very interesting points in the report itself about the difficulties of relying on just quite bold, to be honest, data, and about making sure we're on top of emerging themes in child poverty, particularly those that just didn't exist pre-pandemic. And obviously this is a fast changing area. So I think it's a very positive development that there's a specific strategic working group who are looking at pandemic research, because this is just going to change so quickly. And as Maureen said, the power of lived experience, we spoke about this in Performance and Review the other day as well. And I'd read about an ESRC project down in Leeds earlier this week about the importance of that as well, and how traditionally the form of expertise that comes with either lived experience or the experience of people working in the front line hadn't been included, and frankly hadn't really been valued in mainstream policy debate in general, UK-wide and beyond. And as a result, there's been so many sort of missed opportunities for policy developments and intervention that we could have taken. So it really is a breath of fresh air to hear Rhonda talking about this collaborative approach we're talking about here, and just the breadth of work that's happening with partners across our area as well. On maximising income as well, I was very surprised with the figure that was in the report, the idea that there's potentially well over 500,000 people in the UK who are eligible for UC and didn't claim it. I know that many of us, myself included, could spend the rest of the meeting, frankly, talking about the inadequacies of universal credit and the problems that it's caused. And obviously that perception is undoubtedly bound up with the idea of it's a perceived hassle to apply for it, or the stigma that's to apply for it as well. But for me, this just really underlines the importance of a lot of the work we've been doing on auto-enrolment within the council to make sure that people are getting everything they're entitled to, and the more general work on maximising income. And we know that there's more changes on the way, more support from the Scottish Government coming on the expansion of the Scottish Child Payment, for example, by the end of the year. So I think it's a very positive step to hear about the face-to-face advice that will be offered to families to help them sort of navigate that changing landscape. Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Alan Faulkner.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a question and I have a bit of background to that question. In regard to page 18, the last paragraph, the Citizens Advice Bureau continue to offer financial health checks. Can I ask, the Citizens Advice Bureau being paid extra for this on top of their annual grant and the free use of premises. And the reason for me asking is, having attended a participatory budget meeting covering Hill House and Burnbank, I was shocked to see that Citizens Advice Bureau charged that group £12,000 for 12 half-day sessions. Now, bearing in mind that we fund this, the Citizen Advice, we give them free premises, they've 20 staff and an average of 20 grand, they've a chief executive and 38,000. We gave them 12,000, and that was to the detriment of after-school clubs, community gardens, away weekends for kids. I mean, I'm quite shocked. We then had the situation at the same meeting that we had the community engagement team, two officers there, 2 social work officers there, and 2 housing officers there. And these 3 organisations all can provide benefit advice in the area. They didn't dare. I did speak to a senior officer in the council who defended it. I'm just quite shocked that they took 12 grand out of an area that's went through urban aid, SIP, regeneration, and it's now our place, our plan. So in Thingley, could you tell me, are we going to get charged for this service, and why did they charge 12 grand to Hill House and Burnbank? Thank you, Chair.
I'll bring Cleland into this item at this present time.
Thanks, Chair. It's just to clarify, the allocation that Councillor Faulkner's talking about went through a participatory budgeting process. That means that the communities themselves determined where the budget was to be allocated, and they chose that to fund the CABs accordingly. So Council endorsed it and then followed through with the distribution of the monies, but it wasn't a council decision. It's a participatory budgeting decision to distribute the money and to spend it on additional CAB activities. So hopefully that's helpful clarification. I'm sure that information has been shared previously.
Yeah.
Chair, supplementary.
No, wait a minute, Alan. You have asked this question and said what you've got to say before on the matter. And again, you've had the answer back. So, from my point of view, I don't think any other discussion is necessary on this. And, if you raise it at a further meeting, I'm not going to allow any comment on it. Okay, thanks very much.
Can I come back, Chair?
Sorry?
Can I come back?
Not if it's in the same subject, Alan.
Well, it isn't the same subject. We're supposed to
I'm not allowing any further discussion.
Well, has any other area been charged 12 grand?
I'm not
Can I quote Derek Mitchell, Chief Executive of the CAB Scotland? CAB's played a vital role in providing free and impartial advice. Disgraceful.
Thanks very much for your contribution. I'm moving on to Robert Brown. Robert.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. This is a very welcome report, but I think in the background, of course, we're still conscious that the figures of almost a quarter of the child population, if you like, are involved in this. And that's not just, if you like, a general figure, because we can get swamped in the sheer number of figures. It's individual families and individual children across South Lanarkshire. I was interested in the research subgroup. I thought that was quite an interesting initiative, which hopefully can come up with other things, because we are asked here to try and focus on what will produce a step change. Now, manifestly, as other people have said, we've got issues at the UK government, the Scottish government level, and all that have to be tackled as well. And I think the issue is what we can add value to at the South Lanarkshire level. And I just wondered if there was anything in particular that was coming as a focus out of all that. I mean, we're beginning to get towards a wraparound care thing at school. We're beginning to get towards focusing on the employment thing, which is rightly made to be the important thing. The cost of living, the cost of the school day, we've done some good stuff on that as well. And in many ways, this feeds into opportunities for young people, doesn't it? In a way, the poverty thing is one level, whereas poverty causing lack of opportunity is the other angle we shouldn't probably lose track of as well. So I wonder if Rhonda could give any sort of further clarification about the kind of focus going forward and things that might make the step change that the Scottish Government's talking about.
Rhonda?
Yep, thank you very much. So the subgroup in terms of research is relatively early days that we've started pulling that together. There's a whole range of information out there which focuses on research that's been carried out and activity that's happened in other areas and the impacts of those. So what we're doing at the moment is trying to work through all of this information and look at where we can pull together the learning. And from that, there will undoubtedly be areas that we identify that can be improved on, because there always is government areas, this is a process which is ongoing, as I'm sure you'll understand. So at the moment, it's probably too early to say definitively this and this, but that's something that we will be working towards over the next few months as we look towards next year's plan. This is an annual plan, so it's a constant process. We just finished this one and already started looking at what do we know about the situation and what actions are we looking to take for next year. So we will be bringing more information back on that at a future date.
Could I just ask about that, Chair, if I might? Is there, this is an annual report and clearly it's got a particular purpose to it. I wondered if there'd be any kind of interim thing would come back to the Executive Committee or elsewhere on any initiatives that emerged from that, because I think I'd personally like to keep a close tag on, if you like. I'm sure that would be the case with other members as well. I don't know how that would actually work through in terms of a half-yearly or quarter-yearly or something other thing, or just as required, but perhaps we can have just an assurance that something would come back on that if you've got something useful to tell us on it.
Yeah, I'd be quite happy with that, Robert. If Rhonda feels at any time she has something she'd like impact to the Executive Committee, I have no problem with that at all. Okay, Rhonda.
Yeah, certainly. We'll look at scheduling an update at some point. Then I can speak to obviously the appropriate people and make sure we've got that in place and bring back a progress report at the right point through the year.
Thanks very much. Alec Allison. Alec.
Thanks, Chair. Use these well-trodden words in welcoming the report. What I would all just like to say as well, it's pleasing to see the amount of work that has been done, particularly just now with making sure that all benefits are fully accessed. And I think Rhonda needs congratulations, I think, in the way that she's brought all organisations together to fulfil that. But I think, as it also says in the report, one of the best ways out of poverty is employment. And if you've got employment, better employment. Again, there is work being done there, but I just think that we perhaps need to be doing more at this time. As notice, I believe figures at the moment are showing that vacancies for jobs are at the highest level ever. So therefore, I think anything we can do to support Rhonda from the Council to be able to encourage people to get back into work, or if they're in work, to get a better job is very, very important. And I would encourage her to ask for support if she believes Council can add to her role in being able to achieve that.
Okay. Thanks, Alec. Monique?
Hi, thanks, Chair. This is a great report. I enjoyed the presentation of it yesterday, and I think the gentleman's name was Kevin Malarkey, one of our officers. He was brilliant, took us through it, and that was it, getting it right for South Lanarkshire Children's Partnership Board. There's a lot of great stuff in it, but there's a couple of questions I had, Rhonda. I just, when I was looking at the key challenges, which obviously I know that that's right for us to do a SWOT analysis, what I was looking for was some more information. See for the and the key challenges, this is for everybody else, it's on page 109. It was like we talk about the employability landscape and talk about how obviously it's currently uncertain because of COVID, totally acceptable. But it says once support for the coronavirus job retention scheme ends, the number of individuals facing redundancy is expected to increase, which would be a common sense approach that would happen, unfortunately. Could you let me know, and I've got a couple of questions, what measures are you going to put in place to kind of try and do a kind of catch all, or catch as many as possible? The other thing as well was I had noticed that obviously digital exclusion it's a real worry for all of us, which is why we've changed standing orders when it comes to community councils and whatever else. But I noticed that there was a pilot that was being done which could be taken up nationally, and that we had chosen Hamilton. It was just to find out obviously if, for taking this forward, if there is going to be a rollout with more pilots being done in each of the areas, again, effectively as a catch-all. So it was just, they're probably the two main questions. Anything else I'll take offline.
Okay. Rhonda?
Thank you. I hope you don't mind if I maybe bring in my colleague Kevin, who is here today to answer any questions, and he's probably got a little bit more in-depth information that he can pass on those.
Excellent, and I can apologise in advance. I couldn't remember Kevin's second name. That was really rude of me, so I'm sorry, Kevin.
It's not a problem, Councillor. I can't believe you can't remember my second name. I thought the presentation was fantastic. Anyway, listen, thanks for the comments. One thing I've been struck, I haven't come along to this group before, but the kind of support is really, really welcome for this area of work. If you look at the kind of section just after the bit that Councillor McAdams is talking about, pages 110 to 113, you'll see the kind of intended activity set out for this calendar year and any kind of actions and measures that we've highlighted. And one of the things that the national strategy, Every Child, Every Chance, challenges the 32 local authorities and respected health boards is what more can you do for children and families? And certainly in terms of how we support the employability agenda and give families every chance and give parents every chance to increase their hours and increase their employability options is absolutely crucial and will be central to that. We're already thinking about the fourth version of our local child poverty plan, and as Rhonda's already touched on, that step change, that improvement agenda is very much something that will be central to that, and will consider how we can increase employability for our families facing the kind of difficulties of poverty. Who knows what's around the corner in terms of the impact of COVID, and the one thing that we want to do, and it's already been mentioned in the passing, is the research group that we've set up, who will kind of look at all that evidence and all that data and kind of the kind of reports that are produced, and make sure that we're considering South Lanarkshire position. The one challenge for me, and it's something that I'm no doubt as an authority, as a partnership, we would have embraced long before now if it had been for COVID, is that additionality, that partnership working. So what you see in terms of the report is largely an amalgamation of what individual organisations are doing, presented in a very kind of readable way. What we want to do is, in terms of in partnership, is to make sure that we're providing additional support to that. And as I said, the employability agenda will be very much part of that. So that's a long-winded answer. I'm not sure if I can answer your specific question, Councillor.
No, it's great. Okay? Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Monique. Joe?
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to follow up. Well, I wouldn't repeat what's already been said, but I think that point for me about moving towards what is the evidence-based interventions we can make actually supported by the improvement service. I think that's a very positive direction to be going on, to be going in, and so I would appreciate a report on that at a later point. I think that's very sensible request. The other question that I had is more general, which is just about the sort of state of the Money Matters service. So the report does talk about the impact in face-to-face services and the sort of impact in recovery. So I'd just like to get a feel for what the Money Matters service is. What it's obviously been operating throughout that period, but affected by the pandemic and the public health restrictions. So I'm just wondering if it's possible to get an idea of where that service is in terms of gearing back up and how we're dealing with those face-to-face issues. Because I think I wouldn't repeat or go over the ground earlier in terms of Alan Faulkner's question, but I think where there is an issue that I'd like to have more of an understanding of is around just duplication. And so how do these things knit together? How does Citizens Advice Bureau and our Money Matters service knit together? Because we would have no control over double funding, as it were, if that's what a community decides it wants to do. I don't, unless somebody's going to tell me differently. But I think that, to me, is just where there's a pertinent issue for us to explore today. Thanks.
Rhonda, I'm not sure if I'm actually not sure, Joe, if it would be maybe better if we could produce some sort of report to give everyone an indication of the tie-up and a more general idea of the duties of Money Matters as compared to Citizens Advice Bureau, so that more people would have a general understanding. I'd probably bring in Cleland here just to see what you would think on that.
Chair, I might just duck that one to Paul, because I think Paul was going to make a comment. He had his hand up.
Right, okay.
Paul? I'm happy to do that, Chair, and listen, happy to take your lead in terms of coming back with some kind of update, just going through how those things interrelate with each other. Money Matters is within social work resources. You know, to pick up on a couple of issues, it obviously has been affected across the course of the pandemic, because the service was based on face-to-face discussion. That's had to change. We have put in place across the period of the pandemic as well, though, an increased telephone-based offering. And that's also been extended within my own resource in terms of benefits and advice services. And I think both yourself and Councillor Fagan are right. Moving forward, I think it would be pertinent to look at how these things interact with each other and whether we're getting the best synergies that we can moving forward. So I would take your lead on that. It probably is the right time to bring forward some information in that in terms of how we can make this a more progressive way ahead. Thanks, Chair.
You okay with that, Joe?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah.
Right. Margaret Cooper.
Thanks, Chair. I want to come back to the question that Alan Faulkner raised. A number of people have made speeches today and have not asked a direct question. I'm not actually clear why Alan wasn't allowed to get an answer to the question that he raised. I don't know that I fully understood Cleland's response to that, but it would seem from what was said that CAB provide free services, and I would like clarity about, is it an income generating organisation? So, you know, in terms of them charging to provide information to a particular group, and what do they do with that income generation, and how does that affect the money that the council provides to the organisation? I don't see how the two things sit together, that they provide a free service, but they're also charging for a service. And I wondered what the reason for that would be.
Right, I'll let Cleland come in on that first. Margaret.
Okay, so Chair, apologies to Councillor Cooper if I wasn't clear previously. Picking up your latter question, I'll come back to the first one. How an independent organisation like CAB operates is a question that needs to be put to CAB, not to the council. So if CAB have income generating activities, as many not-for-profit organisations do, that's a question you might want to put to your local CAB, and they could advise you what activity they undertake and on what terms and what basis. So it's not really for us to answer that. Just to be clear, the response I gave to Councillor Faulkner related to his comment about a decision that was taken following a participatory budget exercise where the community who voted chose to allocate funding to a CAB. So they'd chosen to prioritise that over other options that you mentioned. So it wasn't a decision that council took, it was part of a community decision-making process under PB. So that was the basis of my question. But in terms of the more detailed bit about how individual Citizens Advice Bureaus operate, what income generating activity they undertake, etc., is a question you'd want to put to your local one, and they could advise you specifically about what they do.
Just following up on that, Chair, I think maybe Paul could answer this then. When we're considering the amount of funding that the council allocate to CABs, do we have a picture of what income they've generated over the year, and would that influence the figure that we would provide out to that organisation?
Cleland or Paul?
In terms of an analysis of CAB's income, no, that's not something that I believe Councillor Cooper figures in decisions as to the amount of funding the council extends to them.
Well, it might be something that we should be considering. I mean, it's, you know, if they're generating income, obviously they've got that at their fingertips to use, and that could influence the amount of money that the council needs to provide to them to allow them to continue with their service, unless there's a dictate from central government that councils have to provide a certain figure. So anyway, thanks for the answer, but I'd like a wee bit more consideration given to that. Thanks. And Rhonda, I don't want to detract from your report, but I just needed to get clarity on that issue. Because I feel I didn't get it earlier. But it's an excellent report, well done, and thank you for all the work that's gone into it. Thank you.
And Margaret, the reason I stopped any further question was because Councillor Faulkner has been given this answer on numerous occasions, and has raised it on numerous occasions and been given the same answer. And there was no point in going through it again. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Robert.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I'm sorry to come in on this one, but as a former chair of a CAB, I think we're getting into the realm of myths with some of the questions and suggestions here. Now, I may be a bit out of date on how the thing works, but the CABs across South Lanarkshire get core funding for their main office, if you like, and the main service that they provide. And in that situation, it's a sort of standard figure that's been negotiated over a number of years. It's not vast. I think by recollection, it's something of the order of £30,000 or £40,000 a year per bureau. Now, in addition to that, certainly in my area, the Rutherglen Cambuslang Bureau provides some outreach services in some of the local facilities to widen the ability of them to provide always free advice to individuals on these sorts of matters. And they're required to fund, in addition to the core grant, the organisation of the outreach services, the cost of the facility, and the person that goes and does the work at them. I imagine it'll be similar in other areas as well. And I think that's probably where the PB thing has come in Alan's area that he's speaking about before. It's nothing to do with the core funding. It's an extra to do with additional services that are being provided in local areas to make the advice facility more available. And the advice, frankly, is one of these growing things, along with money matters in the current climate. You know, there's a considerable demand for advice, and the CAB is the national advice service provider. Now, Paul's offered a report on this one. I hope it'll bring out some of these particular points, but I think we're off on some tangents here, frankly, which are not justified by the vision. CAB is an independent, impartial and free service as far as individuals are concerned. It does generate other grant facilities to support his other activities, like these outreach things. There's an occasional research project I think are done as well, that kind of thing. It's not a matter of it being diverted from other things as far as I'm concerned. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks, Robert. I would agree with most of what you're saying there. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of sympathy with that, and I think I don't want to take too much time in this issue, but can I come back to where I think Councillor Faulkner was asking a legitimate question, if maybe he phrased it differently from how I would, but that's not uncommon when Alan and I are in meetings. But it was that point about double funding. So if this is an enhancement to a service or to advice in an area that a community believe is sufficient, then I don't know that there's much you can do about it under that. That might be perfectly legitimate and part of that process. I'm not close enough to know what the benefits of one's offer were to the community over another. I think the issue is, but just for me, where I think it was a legitimate question, was if we are essentially double funding something that we could be providing elsewhere or that has already been funded, bearing in mind we provide, as Paul said earlier, our own benefits advice service and the money advice service, then I think that's something we need to be aware of and potentially should be giving a steer to communities to when it comes to exercising their participatory budgeting choices. So I think that actually is a legitimate question relevant to the paper, and that's why I'm quite interested to see the follow-up information that Paul has volunteered to provide us. The other point I would just make is I think Councillor Faulkner did actually ask a separate question that didn't get answered, and that separate question was about the financial health checks and that the CAB are undertaking. Is that something they are funded to do, or is that a service that they provide generally, as it's mentioned in a report that's authored by the entire Community Planning Partnership? Again, I don't think anyone is criticising CAB. We're trying to get to how these things knit together, as I said previously.
Well, I'm hoping that report will actually provide that information, Joe. But I'll bring in Rhonda at this present.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to clarify the use of the word free in the report that's in front of you today, and just to make really clear that that refers to the family or the person who's looking for advice, and not to the cost of the advice being provided by whichever service they approach, that is free to the user at that point. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Cleland, do you want to come in first?
Yeah,
Katie.
Hopefully helpfully, Chair, because just to reflect back, Paul has indicated we'll bring forward the report that updates members in relation to advice services more generally. That will include the offer by CAB. One point of caution I would have to say is our relationship with organisations where we're either buying services or we're granting them for a particular purpose is one thing. But I think the figure I saw, we've got 2,300 community organisations who are registered in South Lanarkshire, all of whom may pursue other funding or other income, etc. It's beyond the bit that we're buying, we're contracting services, or we are paying for a particular purpose. What those organisations do in terms of their own income generation and other engagements or contracts that they enter into is beyond us. It's not our business. And if another community or voluntary organisation is hugely successful in its fundraising, gaining money to deliver other services that are out with the contracts that we have with them, good luck to them. But we shouldn't be taking decisions about whether to contract with them or not on the basis of whether they're successful in other funding or not. It's purely about what we're buying or the service that they're delivering on our behalf. That's our focus. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cleland. Katie?
Thanks very much, Chair. Just to absolutely agree with what Cleland said there, and thank you for laying that out so clearly. We've got multiple examples where we're working in partnership with an organisation in the council. I'm thinking of some of the Breakfast Club and the Holiday Club activity, where those organisations are pursuing funding in different areas completely legitimately and for very good reason to support the work they're doing. Very brief point, Chair. It's just, I'd like to briefly express the hope that when we're talking about PB in the future in general, that we move beyond things like the idea that something might be perfectly legitimate or giving communities a steer. It just feels like everything we've said on lived experience there has taken a slight step backwards. We need to show our communities that we have trust in them during this process. It's an absolutely key plank of it. So yes, by all means, I would welcome another report or more information about this in the future, but it's just a plea. Can we tread very, very lightly and carefully not to lose the good work and the trust that we're building up with the communities so far? Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thanks very much for that discussion, folks. We'll move on to item 8, which is end of current council and preparations for new council on pages 121 to 128. And I would invite Geraldine to speak in this. Boy, doesn't time pass by when you're enjoying yourself? Almost 5 years already. Geraldine.
Thank you, Chair. This report, as you said, just advises members of the need to make preparations for the end of the current council and for the commencement of the new council following the local government election in May 2022. And it also seeks approval for the decision-making period in the gap between the end of the cycle of committee meetings and the statutory meeting of the council. The arrangements to deal with the council business leading up to the election are set out in section 4 of the report. Now, usually in past years, I've gone back quite a bit, the council business usually ends, the meeting cycle end with the last meeting, usually in March. Now, this year it's on the 2nd of March 2022. And usually there is a request for the Chief Executive to have delegated authority to deal with business from that date to the first meeting of the new council. That's the statutory meeting in May. And that's what I'm asking for today in this report, that we do the same as we've done previously, and the Chief Executive is given that delegated authority to deal with business from the 2nd of March until the statutory meeting of the council. And there would be a report brought back to the statutory meeting of all the business that the Chief Executive has dealt with during that period. There would need to be some meetings during that period. For example, planning and licensing don't stand still. So there would need to be, for a planning and licensing committee, potentially licensing boards, and there may be employee appeals that would need to be dealt with as well, which would be held as normal during that time. The preparations for the new council, what that involves is set out in section 5 of the report, the list of the things that we would do, and there is a summary of the key tasks in section 6 to 9 of the report, and that's on page 122 right the way through to 124. This will involve necessarily a full review of all the supporting documents, scheme of delegation, terms of reference, standing orders and financial regulations. I know that we did a comprehensive review as part of the midterm review, but we would do that again, and we would consult with officers and we would consult with members. It's proposed that we consult with members via the Standards and Procedures Advisory Forum, and that will include asking them about any changes that they would like to see, and particularly any changes to the role profiles for elected members and the multi-member ward protocol. We'll take a first paper to a meeting of the Standards, Procedures and Advisory Forum in September to allow that consultation to begin. The revised documents would then be prepared and they would be brought back to the statutory meeting of the Council in May 2022 for approval. It's also proposed that, as in previous years, what we would do is we would have a survey of elected members to allow all elected members to feed in. And what that would cover is set out in section 6.4 of the report. It's proposed that the elected members survey that I've spoke about will cover the questions, will cover these items as well, and that we would propose to bring the draft questions to the first meeting of the Standards and Procedures Advisory Forum in September, to get the survey out in October with a deadline of responding by the end of October. That would allow the outcomes to be brought back to the SPAF at a meeting in November 2021. There will be a whole range of member induction and training that has to be carried out, and this is all set out in section 7 and the arrangements for that. You'll recall there's a lot of work done initially the first week. There's like introductions, induction, etc. done then. And then there are drop-in sessions, there's a code of conduct, and then there's a full range of training then put in place for the rest of the year from June to March 2023. I don't intend to go into that in detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions that members may wish to ask. We'll also need to have a look at members' ICT provision, and usually there's arrangements made that for any councillor who's not returning, who's going to stand down or retire, to retain their equipment up until the election date, but if they wish to do so, they can hand it in before that. That allows it to be just wiped in preparation for handing out maybe to an officer in the future. There will be arrangements for new ICT equipment, which will be handed out to members in the week beginning the 9th of May after the election, and an appointment system would be set up to do that. First statutory meeting of the council has to be held 21 days after the date of the election, so that will be by the 25th of May at the latest. That would need to be held. So taking you back to the recommendations in the report, it is to ask you to note that the final meeting of the council would take place on the 2nd of March 2022. The cycle of meetings, all the meetings, is listed in the appendix to the report on page 127. That in line with normal practice, the Chief Executive is authorised to deal with business from the 2nd of March until the new council, with a report on the issues being submitted to the statutory meeting, and that the preparations detailed in sections 5 to 9 of the report are noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you much, Geraldine. I'm looking for questions from colleagues. I see Robert has his hand up. Robert?
Yes, just one very brief one, Chair, and I think I may have vanished because something didn't restart my computer, so if I disappear, that's what it is. I was really going to ask that because of the change in the way in which the council works, the minority council and all that, we have quite an accumulation of business on the day we have executive and council, and I wonder if that might be looked at as well as a better way of organising that. It may suit some people to get it all over in one day. There may be other people who take a different view on it, but I think it's an issue we have to tackle because of the pressure that there is on staff and members because of that. Just leave that point with you, if I may.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Noted. Joe?
Thanks, Chair, and I should also say thank you to Cleland for making clear in that rather extended period in which some delegated authority would be applied that he's actually given that commitment to consult with group leaders where that's appropriate, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. My question was about, and I don't know that we have a formal purdah period, as it were, but I'm just wondering if during that period, what practical difference would there be? Obviously, meetings would not be taking place, but would there be any other practical differences in how the council is conducting its business that perhaps we should be making members aware of, and potentially through a note nearer the time that's circulated round the council?
Geraldine?
Yes, Chair. We can do a note. There's some things that we are prevented from doing because of the publicity rules. So there's certain business that just can't take place, because if it's seen to favour one political party over another. But apart from that, it tends to be business as usual, and elected members will still be able to do their business. So we'll be able to meet with their electorate, and we'll be able to just feed back questions to and fro officers. So it's business as usual. The only difference is it's a cycle of meetings. Now, the reason for that is obviously because there's a lot of work has to be done by both all the elected members and by officers just to get the council ready for a new council in May. But certainly, in addition to that, is business as usual.
Yeah, I think unlike MSPs, we're councillors right up to the last day prior to election. Yeah. Okay.
You are.
Robert, you've still got your hand up.
Sorry, I was knocked out there. I'm sorry about that. Just take my hand down if you don't mind. I was just trying to get back in again properly.
Okay, right. I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thanks very much. I know it's coming up time for near a break, but we've only got a couple of items to go, so I'm going to continue with the meeting in the hope that we get through it in time to give us a break before the Climate Change Committee. So if we move on to item 9, which is the Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee appointment of a chair, and that's on pages 129 to 130. And I would ask Geraldine to come back in on this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There is a vacancy in the position of Chair of the Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee because of Councillor Campbell standing down as Chair, but he is still a member of the committee. So as a result of that, nominations are sought for an appointment of Chair to the committee. Now, it has to be an opposition member who is. It's got to be an opposition member who can be a member of the executive committee, although all the other members of the committee, the Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee, are not allowed to be members of the executive committee. The current membership is set out in section 3.2 and just asking for nominations, Chair.
Thank you much, Geraldine. Are there any other Alec?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. It was our intention to propose Eric Holford as chair of this committee to replace Councillor Campbell, and formally do so now if you wish.
Thanks very much, Alec. Do you have a seconder for that, or do we need one?
I can second Councillor Neylon.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else otherwise minded? I'm seeing no hands raised, so Geraldine, can we take it then that Councillor Holford? Oh, sorry, Katie, I see your hand up.
Hi, sorry, I'm just I'm looking at this just now. Does that mean there would need to be another change agreed just now because Councillor Holford's currently a substitute member? So do we need to swap that at the same time?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes, you would have to do that because of the membership. There would be. That would mean that Councillor Wark would need to come off. If Councillor Campbell is remaining a member of the committee, then Councillor Wark would need to come off to allow Councillor Holford to go on.
Mr. Chairman, if it helps yourself, that was what we're intending doing. If Councillor Holford is elected, he will replace Councillor Wark on that committee.
That's fine. Can we arrange for that to be done, Geraldine?
Yes, Councillor Wark could still be a sub on the committee.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. If we can arrange for those necessary arrangements to be made, and if it needs to be signed off, then I'm quite happy to do that. Okay. So I would move that then and hope that we get agreement from everyone.
I'll second, Chair.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That takes us up to item 10, which is noting item in its school clothing grants. And I would ask Paul to come in on this item, please.
Right. Thank you, Chair. So as the paper starts off by is advising of the action taken in terms of standing order number 36C because of the short timescales involved around these school clothing grants. So in terms of what happened here with the change, you can see that picked up at 3.1. The Scottish Government, as part of its first 100 days plan, committed to increase the current minimum grant value, with a new minimum value to be set at £120 for primary and £150 for secondary school pupils. So within South Lanarkshire, what was being paid is or what was previously being paid was laid out at section 3.2. The council was paying £130 to all eligible pupils. So in terms of the change that was made, that again, that is picked up at section 1.1. Under the 36C powers, we increased the level of the school clothing grant to £150 for secondary school pupils. That's in line with that new minimum level set by the Scottish Government. And the primary school figure was maintained at £130. So that's obviously greater than that new minimum level for primary school pupils. So the payment was made on the 9th of July, right, in order that payments could be made in line with the previously requested timescales by elected members, and that was done in the vast majority of cases directly into recipients' bank accounts. So again, at 5.2, you can see some of the detail there in terms of how that was done. So in terms of the recommendation of the paper, is laid out at 2.11 around those actions. So thanks, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Paul. I don't see anybody's hand raised in this matter, so I'm just going to move right to recommendations. Can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thanks very much. That takes us on to urgent business. Now I have an item here which I agreed with the leaders I would highlight at today's meeting. Our leaders pre-meeting on Monday morning, it was agreed that although the COVID pandemic is still pretty much, very much on the forefront, that what we would ask the Chief Executive to do would be bring forward a report to the next full council meeting on where we are with the delivery of services throughout South Lanarkshire, and that members would be able to seek clarity from officers at the full council on any service that needed further explanation. So it's just to highlight that that's actually been agreed with leaders, and that Cleland's going to bring that report forward. Cleland, would you like to say something on that at this point?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. I don't want to extend the meeting too long. I'm happy to bring that back. We'll also update the service spreadsheets that members have received on a set regularity over the course of the year, and we'll have that out to you before the next meeting. The one thing I would want to flag is right now, as you'll have seen in the media, the case prevalence of COVID cases in Lanarkshire, as it is in Scotland, is at the highest level we've ever had since the start of the pandemic. Now, our primary line of defence is obviously the vaccination programme, but it doesn't change the potential for somebody to contract the virus or to pass it on. It simply, hopefully, mitigates the severity with which people react to the virus. But right now, despite all the relaxations we've got in place and that people are able to enjoy, and the ability to do things that they haven't been able to do over the last 18 months, I would just ask for your support as community leaders to lead an understanding amongst our communities that actually, while these things are taking place, a number of our services have never been more pressured. So that includes in acute hospital settings, in primary care settings, in GP practices, in our social care settings, the impact on our education system, and a whole raft of other services. So I suppose it's trying to get the message across. On one hand, you're seeing a lot more freedoms and relaxations, and that's positive because we have to look at this on a holistic four harms basis, as you've heard it referred to. But actually, we've never had it so bad in some of our service areas, and our guys are literally flat out in a number of service areas just trying to keep the wheels on services. So I know that's kind of a mixed message, and that's why it's really important that elected members as community leaders are able to lead that understanding, and we'll illustrate that when we bring forward the paper. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much for that report, Cleland. I'm sure that quite a lot of us do understand the situation. Right, I'm going to call this meeting to a close. I thank everybody for attending. Can I ask?
Chair, I've got my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Monique, didn't see it.
Just a quick one, John. Cleland, take what you say on board. I just wanted to ask a quick question. We used to always get, I know it used to be the responsibility of the education department, and they would basically send out to us as councillors and let us know about, cases in the school with what you said, and obviously the figures are going up. But education's not sending that out anymore because I don't believe it's their remit. It was just to say, who are you passing that on to, so that it means it still keeps us as elected members informed about what is actually happening in our community, because that helps give us a better understanding rather than it just be, kind of scaremongering from people that come to us and then we've then got to go and ask questions. So it used to be education, it used to send it out to us, but we're not getting that anymore because I don't believe it's their responsibility anymore. So who is it that would send it out to us as elected members to let us know about what's happening in the schools, please?
Clyde?
Yeah, so I think one observation I would make is that every school will have cases, and it will vary on a day-to-day basis. It is significant. So, for example, just to give you an illustration, we went from 538 cases in Lanarkshire on Monday to yesterday 938. Today it's about 880, etc. So, these are massively on scale, If you go back to about 2 months ago, we had about 40 cases. So we have to accept that we're going to get a large number of cases. They will impact on schools, it will impact on pupils, and it will impact on teaching staff. So in terms of the individual notifications or case rates, they're no longer as relevant. What we need to look at is the impact of that. So should we find a situation where there is a school where, as you know, again, the self-isolation rules have changed, but where there's a school where there's a significant level of disruption, and as we saw yesterday, I think in Dumfries and Galloway, they actually had to close a school, we would obviously notify members of that, but we can no longer track individual case numbers per school because they're so volatile, and they're going to happen in every school. But my commitment is, if there is a significant disruption to an individual school, we would ensure that local members are clearly advised of that. Is that helpful?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you very much for your time, Cleland. Thank you, Chair.
Fine. I'm going to ask Pauline to rearrange the start of the Climate Change Committee to 10 to 12. That'll give everybody a chance for 15 minutes for a comfort break, okay? And we resume at 10 to 12. Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much.
Chair.
Bye. Bye.